In Paradise Found, we discovered that an apprehension of the divine is central to our understanding of the period in world history between the 4th and 15th centuries. In chapter 88, verses 12 to 16 of the Quran, it says, "The gardens of paradise shall be bounding in branches, therein fountains of running water, and of every fruit there shall be 2 kinds. The believers shall find themselves reclining upon couches lined with brocade, the fruits of the garden nigh together, and goblets set forth, and carpets outspread." In the Muslim tradition, woven carpets replicated the design of the fourfold garden. The design consisted of a central watercourse with tributary canals of various sizes, interrupted by islands or by ponds, containing waterfowl and fishes, lined by avenues of stylized small trees and shrubs that surrounded flower plots, which are often shaded by great plane trees. One of the earliest documented accounts of a great woven garden carpet that we have was of one used in the garden of one of the Sassanid princes who reigned in pre-Islamic Persia from 531 to 579. Khosrow I's woven carpet represented a pleasure garden, and a contemporary description of it says, "It had a wide border all round, showed flower beds of various colouring, the flowers being blue, red, yellow or white stones. The ground was yellowish to look like earth, and it was worked in gold. The edges of the streams were worked in stripes, and between them stones bright as crystal gave the illusion of water, the size of the pebbles being what pearls might be. The stalks and branches were gold or silver, the leaves of trees and flowers made of silk, like the rest of the plants, and the fruits were coloured stones." The original was lost or perished in the dust, leaving only many records of it by contemporary admirers, many of whom also attempted to replicate it. This style of carpet became part of a time-honoured tradition in woven textile art that was practised and recorded by many different cultural traditions before and after the birth of Christ. Fragments in museums around the world reveal that Egyptian linen was a finely woven strong cloth that provided for everyone both in life and death, and many have samples taken from remains of clothes and mummy wrappings. Paintings on tomb walls and models depicting weavers producing fabric made by Egyptian workers still exist. In Egypt, linen was a laboriously difficult cloth to weave from fibres of the flax plant, and some images show that clothes also featured embroidery. This is perhaps a good point to pause and discuss the difference between tapestry and embroidery. The difference is in technique of manufacture, and from experience I have discovered in contemporary times that these are not always understood. Tapestry is a thick textile fabric in which weft threads are woven, originally by hand, into warp threads fixed lengthwise onto a loom, and pictures or designs are created virtually row by row as the weaver progresses. Embroidery is the enrichment of a flat foundation of fabric, such as linen, cotton, silk or wool, by using a needle, coloured silks or coloured cottons, as well as gold and silver thread and other extraneous materials. By the 11th century, traditions associated with weaving tapestry were firmly established in both the East and West, and during the next 300 years, tapestry would become a great symbol of status and influence. Tapestries were easily transportable, and in great keeps and castles they covered the walls of stone, bringing both warmth and protection, and as a bonus engaged and educated the viewer with colourful illustrative stories. By the 14th century, tapestry was, without doubt, the greatest of all the forms of artistic expression, and famous tapestries became spoils of war as knights pillaged them from all over Europe as well as in the Holy Land. The very best came from Arras in northern France, previously an important garrison town for the Roman Empire. Its whole population converted to Christianity during the 4th century, and it became a centre for the wool industry. In the year 1180, it was granted a commercial charter by the French crown, and over the centuries its renown and wealth would grow, based on the successful production of fine tapestries, for which the word Arras became a generic term. Often woven in sets to enrich early Christian church interiors, edifying worship by illustrating biblical stories, they dramatize the lives of saints and martyrs, reinforcing and demonstrating the tenets of Christian belief. They also supported other religious image art forms, such as stained glass windows and statuary, as layer upon layer of meaning was built up, using symbolism, illustrating the writings of medieval Christian mystics and others. During the Middle Ages, the majority of people gained an understanding of the world they lived in and their heritage through imagery, as they were unable to read the written word. Subsequently, their visual awareness was more than likely far more acute than ours is today. In Greek mythology, the three goddesses of destiny and fate were dressed in draped white cloth. The so-called three fates is an image captured in many formats, depicting them weaving the threads of destiny, because they were also the personification of the inescapable, preordained destiny of man. Lachesis determined the length of the thread, the period of one's life. Clotho combed the wool and spun the thread of life, and Atropos wove the thread into the fabric of one's actions. So the belief was that it didn't matter what you decided you wanted to do or be, you couldn't really escape your preordained destiny. In ancient Greece, priests of the temple were the oracles or seers, and it is no coincidence that religious clergy became known as men of the cloth. The qualities that were the special characteristic or hallmarks of what would become the fully developed European medieval art of tapestry were excellence in design, crispness of execution, wonderful depth of tone, superb richness, and exquisite gradations of colour. The colours were natural dyes set by mordants such as alum, a necessary process in fixing the dye to the wool. Such was the commercial strength of the textile industry, owning deposits of alum at that time was a sure way to wealth, and in today's terms it could be compared to owning your own oil well. Secular themes included ancient tales of Greek and Roman mythology, aspects of love, as well as contemporary conflicts and revelry. The symbolism attached to numbers and animals was also of major significance, assisting in conveying a message, moral or otherwise, about the glory and welcome abundance of creation. Designs were created as the weaver progressed, out of their imagination, or from documentary evidence that we have from about the 14th century, from a drawing or painting on a broadsheet of paper. Some of these very earliest cartoons are still in existence and were hardly more than sketches. It was quite common for weavers to exercise their own flair by adding a small animal or a particular expression to a face, ensuring that each work had its own peculiar characteristic and features. Workshops in various centres of weaving throughout Europe produced an abundance of pastoral scenes. They also produced what we know as the verdure type, one that has predominantly blue and green colouring, with landscapes, streams, waterfalls, and an emphasis on trees, foliage and fauna. In the late medieval period of the 15th century, the now famous millefleurs tapestries made their appearance. They were characterised by having backgrounds of hundreds of tiny flowers. The word millefleurs is French for 1,000 flowers, and as a background for a tapestry, flowers were considered the height of fashion and sophistication. They were all symbolic. Lily of the valley was white, representing the virginity of the Virgin Mary, and the daisy meant resurrection. The tapestries sparkle with a profusion of amazingly intricate blooms, providing the perfect foil for scenes depicting the hunt and courtly love. Although the precise origin of the millefleurs motif is open to speculation, one possible suggestion is the technique was an attempt to preserve year-round images of flowers whose nature was very fleeting. Speculation aside, the 1,000-flower style clearly continues to delight viewers, even after all of these centuries. The most famous of all the tapestries in this style are the 6 in a series known as the Lady and the Unicorn. This group of superb tapestries features an enchanting combination of deep red ground strewn with an abundance of flowers. Woven from a combination of woolen, silk and gold thread, these fabulous wall hangings have exercised an almost universal fascination on all those who have encountered them for hundreds of years. In the 19th century, Prosper Mérimée, the French inspector of historic monuments, drew the attention of authorities to the beauty and importance of these tapestries after finding them hanging on damp walls in the rat-ridden chateau at Pessac in 1835. Sadly, they were still there in 1844 when renowned novelist of her day, George Sand, mentioned them in her novel Sheen, and then endeavoured to use her influence to have them removed to safety. They were still there in 1853 when another French baron drew the attention of the curator of the Cluny Museum at Paris, who negotiated long and hard to secure them. And it was in 1883 when they were finally inaugurated at the Cluny Museum. This seemingly little-known museum is now called the Musée du Moyen Âge, where the tapestries form the focal point of an outstanding collection of medieval art. The tapestries are meant to intrigue, and they do. Every piece would have taken years to weave, and their superb contrasting colours create a unique impression of harmony. 5 of the tapestries represent the important human senses: sight, smell, hearing, taste and touch, and they quite literally take your breath away for the eternal freshness of their colours. 5 is a powerful number in symbolism. Early cultures believed that the 5 senses were a facet of the creation of man and sacred, to the extent to which you consider a human being to be sacred, or at least potentially so. Every detail delights the eye. The textiles represented include brocades, velvets and silks, and they are shown off with jewels, all of which have been rendered in wool with surprising exactitude. Then there is the detailing of the millefleurs, or the thousands of flowers, which is more than impressive, and were all found in fields throughout France at that time. They are combined with familiar animals such as foxes, dogs and ducks, all mingling with exotic creatures such as panthers, cheetahs and lions. The animals all have a basis in symbolism, such as the rabbit, which predictably represents fertility, the dog loyalty, while the panther, who had a sweet breath, represented the word of Christ. Then there is the goat, who is all-knowing, while the wolf, well, he's the devil incarnate. Our gaze lingers longest, and perhaps with curious pleasure, on that mythological beast, the unicorn, who is really worth an essay on his own. He is both savage and loyal, and like Christ, pure and invincible, while his flanking friend, the lion, the king of beasts, is both strong and courageous. In some instances, they appear to have just been plucked off a coat of arms to flank the figures and give them authority, but they are skillfully rendered, and the beauty of their draftsmanship is striking. The centrally focused lady is depicted in an ordinary, everyday attitude, although she's dressed in different costumes in each one historically. She is the one who creates the aura of mystery, one that has endured. Who was she? Did she represent some famous person? Or is she, as some scholars claim, an allegory for the Blessed Virgin Mary? Does the crescent motif that is repeated constantly throughout the tapestries suggest her fascination with the East? Or is it an allusion to her being aligned with the Greek goddess of the hunt, Artemis, or the Roman god, Diana? History has since destroyed much documentation. Most theories and the answers to many questions still remain obscure. What we do know is that the coat of arms belonged to a family from the region of Lyon. Jean Laviste had a distinguished record of service to the king as president of the Court of Aids. The tapestries were commissioned by him, and they proclaim the very high position that he held and reflect his personal glory. Then there is the enigma of the sixth tapestry, which appears to match but really stands alone, with its tent studded with golden teardrops, its flaps framing the brocade-begowned and bejewelled young lady who is drawing all eyes to a central scene where she's replacing jewels in a casket to send them back, lending credence to the moral significance of the inscription, "À mon seul desire," freedom from the passions provoked by ill-controlled senses. Two important details still elude researchers: the personality of the artist who designed the tapestries for Jean Laviste and the place where they were woven. Henry Ward Beecher in the 19th century said, "We sleep, but the loom of life never stops, and the pattern which was weaving when the sun went down is weaving when it comes up in the morning." And now it's time for us to take a break, and we'll come back with part 2 of The Threads of Destiny.